We have had an inclusive entrepreneurship boom. What is the cause and what isn't? We'll talk about that today in Culture Builder Live. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. For 15 years, we've covered entrepreneurial trends. We are deeply proud to be releasing today a report on the past, the present, and the future of inclusive entrepreneurship. We're going to have a bit of a conversation on inclusive entrepreneurship trends because of that with three leaders in this space: Kelly Burton, the founder and CEO of Black Innovation Alliance; Hwang, the founder and CEO of Right to Start; Jamie Sears, co-head of social impact and philanthropy at UBS in the US and a partner of ours on the report. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to hear from all of you. I got a lot that I'm going to try to get through in a tight time. Kelly, you were in this report for lots of reasons. One reason, though, is so many years ago, a decade or so ago, you were a founder, a repeat founder. A decade later, you have founded and led entrepreneurial support organizations. I wonder how much would the entrepreneur support organizations that you help lead today, how much would they have helped the Kelly Burton of 10 years ago as a founder?
I think that's a really great question. At Black Innovation Alliance, we're a national coalition of organizations that support Black founders. They are Black-led incubators, Black-led accelerators. Currently, there are 116 in our network at Black Innovation Alliance. And every day they're walking alongside entrepreneurs, making sure they have access to the resources, the investment, the network, the education that they need in order to scale and grow. So I can tell you in a very short period of time, BIA is 3 years old, but the ecosystem that exists today is very different from the ecosystem that existed 3 years ago. Our organizations in this space are aggregated. There are, as I mentioned, 119 organizations. Based on the last conversation that I had with my director of member relations, we've got 70 organizations on the wait list that are in the application process now for coming in as member. These organizations continue to come on at a rapid clip, and BIA is kind of the central hub in supporting these organizations. So 3 years ago, these organizations were spread out and the work was fragmented. Today, they are aggregated and the work is increasingly coordinated. So I would say as an ecosystem, we are definitely in a better place today than we were in the recent past.
I want to come back to that, but Victor, I want to turn to you. I've interviewed you for years. You, in many roles, have been an entrepreneurial watcher across this country. You've now founded Right to Start and working on policy on it. I guess I want you to call nonsense on me. You've seen for decades entrepreneurship was declining in the United States, and we've had a boom in the last 4 years. Do you think all of these collective programs and efforts have done a darn thing, or will we look back in the past and say there was a giant pandemic anomaly and we were all just futzing?
Well, the data will reveal itself more over time, but I think clearly the landscape has shifted. And I've been doing this work for over 2 decades in entrepreneurship at the grassroots level, and you can see it. I actually happen to be in Tulsa right now in the Greenwood district where the Black Wall Street massacre happened over 100 years ago. And we met with a group of Black women entrepreneurs. And the way they talked about the ecosystem, the way they talked about their ability to access information, resources, people who can help them, it was profoundly different than what I've seen in years past. People actually there's actually significant programming. There's an ecosystem there that people can tap into. Now, is it broad-based and inclusive of everybody? No, but there are resources there that definitely were not there before, and the people that are able to access them is shifting. And so I think the landscape is fundamentally altered, and it's a good thing. Now, the boom happened for a bunch of macroeconomic reasons, in addition to a lot of the micro things that we've done on the programmatic level. But I think if you add up the micro level work, the programmatic work all across the country, you can see this fundamental shift, which is in almost every community across the country, entrepreneurial support has become a thing. It's actually become embedded in the way economic development is being done in hundreds of cities and states. It's being embedded into the way that policymakers think about this. We just were able to, we work with 13 state legislatures this year that introduced Right to Start acts to actually drive change. And in Nevada, the governor actually signed a bill of the first ever Right to Start Act to create a formal office of entrepreneurship to help entrepreneurs access better government contracting, to track better data, to cut red tape and bureaucracy, to reduce the fees and costs of getting into business. And those things add up. We're actually seeing policymakers, economic developers, chambers of commerce respond. And it's fundamentally altered places like Tulsa. you can see that the landscape is different in Tulsa today because of the work that entrepreneurs are doing here.
Jamie, one of the origins of this report, quite literally, is you were someone who I've known for, going on a decade, and you were not particularly interested in the veneer of doing work. You were quite insistent on what is actually happening in this entrepreneurial boom. Is the inclusive entrepreneurship programs of the past having impact? How does it influence where we go in the future? You were very insistent of, I just don't want to keep doing the same thing if I don't know what and why. One of the pieces that's coming out of the early data and research of the pandemic era entrepreneurship boom is those who are starting businesses look a little more representative of the country than we did years ago. Those who are growing companies, adding employees and scale, have not yet seen the same kind of boost in representation. It's a nuance, but I know you often operate in this kind of nuance. I'm just wondering, at your funder level, how much do you look at macro trends, data, and fine tune your own investment strategy? How much does a report like this impact what you're going to do forward, so we can talk to other founders about similarly adapting their strategies?
Well, I guess let's just start with, yes, over the past decade, we have seen women and people of color being very prolific in starting companies, but they're not positioned for growth the way that they could be. And I think that is part of the nuance. So I'm happy to see the change that UBS has been a part of through our social impact group. So our investment strategy, or otherwise what we call our theory of impact, is really driven by our belief that entrepreneurship can be a pathway to ownership and asset building and generational wealth. And generational wealth for us as a firm represents change for individuals, communities, and broader society. So that's part of the reason why our investment strategy is around this work around entrepreneurship. But I guess in terms of positioning founders to grow, I think that's probably a new focus for us. And that's a new focus after many years of investing in training programs, which are still needed. But as Victor and Kelly even were pointing to, there are more of them. There are more of them than they were, a decade ago. But I think that there's a lot more work to do. And so when we were sort of 5 years in, and we were really leaning in hard to funding and starting our own sort of training and resource types of programs, and realizing that the changes that we wanted to be able to see, the real outcomes that we were driving toward, that wouldn't be possible unless we actually change the enabling environment around founders. You can be trained to death almost, and mentored to death. If things around that ecosystem are not changing, then I would say that's sort of where we pause. We revisit what we're doing, what those access points that we're trying to create are for underrepresented founders. And for us, it's largely been women and people of color, and that's because of really long-standing gender and racial inequities that continue to be real and persist today. And so I'd say that from just an investment strategy or focus standpoint, what we should all be doing is looking at outcomes, thinking about the points in the system that are not actually working, and that's maybe tells us where the interventions are. I think that when we see the proliferation of these companies, but not the growth, it says actually a lot about the talent and the strength and the resourcefulness, in this community as they work to try to build and grow companies. But it also tells us about these barriers that exist that really need to be focused on and continue to be committed to. So that's sort of my main takeaway in all of this, which is clearly we've come a long way, but there's so much more that we need to do so that we actually don't go backwards and we focus on outcomes and growth.
You can be mentored to death will ring in my ears for sure. So you hit on going backward. I feel like unable to ignore, just after we put the final touches on this report, we saw this high profile lawsuit against the Fearless Fund, a VC firm with a focus on Black women, there's been a conversation. Our newsroom at Technically has been working on what, if at all, a chilling effect could take place if there's a sense among entrepreneurship support organizations that any race lens could bring about unwanted litigation. Kelly, you lead an entrepreneur support organization. I'm kind of curious, are you having conversations with folks? Are you yet seeing a chilling effect? Do you have a sense of what the downstream impacts of litigation like this could have?
Absolutely. It's very front and center in our community. It sent shockwaves through our community. We are experiencing a backlash around programs like the ones that we support. And we're in the process of really thinking through what's a sustained strategy, what does sustained resistance look like, because we know that it's not just that one. Every day our Slack lit up from our members posting new incidents of similar litigation that's being directed towards organizations that support people of color, because this is the truth that we are confronting on a daily basis at BIA. Our work is really about closing the racial wealth gap. There's a 228-year racial wealth gap, which is the time it's going to take Black family wealth to catch up to white family wealth. At the start of the Civil War, Black folks had access to 1% of the national wealth. Today, Black folks have access to 1.5% of national wealth. So literally over the period of 150 years, we have made 0.5% increase in wealth among African Americans in this country. And it's unsustainable. So we really need to figure out, okay, what is the plan? How do we get hyper-focused on wealth creation within the African American community? And how do we get on the offense? Because venture funding, the venture space is a place where Black folks receive less than 1% of venture capital. And that is that is the reality that has created the response by folks like the Fearless Fund to say, okay, well, if VC is not responding to the disparities, even though we know diverse-led firms outperform non-diverse-led firms, okay, VC has decided not to respond in light of the data. We're going to create solutions for our own community so that we get more than a 1%. And then the powers that be still want to come for us for the scraps that we are getting in the less than one. It is insanity. And the fact that, we have a system that even sustains this sort of nonsense is very discouraging. But we are not discouraged. And we are mounting a response in the moment, and not one that is episodic, but one that is sustained.
I mean, Victor, Kelly just alluded to both of these points, but in this report, again, link will be dropped below. You can also find it on Technically and UBS's website as well. But in this report, we chart this last 15 years of inclusive entrepreneurship, including the rise of that phrase. And it was long seen as a clear and obvious moral imperative, as Kelly alluded to, the unfulfilled promise of wealth inequality. But research began building up in the 2010s after the Great Recession around this also just being this obvious economic gap. They lost Einstein's famous research from Rajetti and others that kind of pointed to, well, just if you have communities that are underrepresented in invention and entrepreneurship and innovation, we're just missing out on opportunity that impacts everyone, leaves everyone poor and without opportunity. I'm kind of curious, you've seen that rise, that move of social justice point and economic principle. How have you seen those two things play out? How have you watched either funders or economic development groups weigh those two balances? What would you guide others to do in terms of balancing the two?
Well, genius is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And that ability to create more broad-based opportunity and give everyone a fair chance to take on their entrepreneurial dreams and take on that fight, which is always going to be a challenge no matter what, has just not been a level playing field. And the data is pretty clear about the power of entrepreneurship and the disparities in that fight. So one of the things that, for instance, we know about entrepreneurship, and this emerged in the last decade, is that entrepreneurs, young businesses, are responsible for almost all net job creation in the United States. That is, older businesses shed jobs or net zero jobs. It's the young businesses that create jobs. Yet you hardly hear that talked about. Politicians like to talk about jobs, and we get excited about jobs, but you almost never hear entrepreneurship as part of that broader civic discussion. We also know that more entrepreneurship leads to higher incomes. This is research from Venture Forward at GoDaddy's, the research shop, which says every 1% increase in entrepreneurial activity in a county leads to an average of $475 increase in household wealth. We also know research that says that every 1% increase in entrepreneurial activity in a state correlates to a 2% decrease in poverty in a state. And we also know that it's the source of GDP. So more entrepreneurs leads to more innovative products and services, which leads to more GDP growth. There's so many reasons entrepreneurship should be in the dialogue, and there's so many reasons that it's not. And so entrepreneurs, this was a Kaufman survey, say that 81% of entrepreneurs say that government favors established big companies over entrepreneurs. 69% of entrepreneurs say that government doesn't care about them at all. So there's very much a sense that the playing field isn't level. And we've seen that through a decrease in rural entrepreneurship by about 80%. We've seen that as a decrease in new entrants in government contracting by about 80%. We've seen huge drop-offs in entrepreneurial activity in certain segments of society. And so the idea that America is this great startup nation and entrepreneurial opportunity should be accessible for all is something that Americans actually deeply believe. 94% of Americans, in fact, say that fair access to pursue your entrepreneurial dreams is important to the future of the country. But it's sort of this thing where we take it for granted, and we actually don't give entrepreneurs the fair support that they should and that we believe they deserve as a society. And so by neglect, we've let entrepreneurship wither and become unequal in many different aspects. And so this is sort of the potential to move forward, which is how do we actually make entrepreneurship more equally accessible for everybody?
Say it louder for those in the back. This report points to it too. We need big businesses because they do employ most Americans. We need small businesses because they support so much of American culture. But new businesses is the creation of them both, and so much economic activity and opportunity. And when we have communities underrepresented in the creation of new businesses, everyone is poorer and worse off. Victor, can't agree more. I'm going to lose all of you in a second. But Jamie, I want you to help me make a point out of this. One of the real goals for the report was to arm those funders who were adjacent to inclusive entrepreneurship or new to the conversations around entrepreneurship as an economic development strategy. So you are our key case study in how folks can identify. So 2 points I hope you can help me wrap up with. One thing that I was pretty genuinely taken with about the UBS case study is there are many teams inside of UBS that are coming at this in different angles on the wealth management side, on community and philanthropy, on the CRA side. One, I'm just curious if you can give us any argument for folks about involving across teams that have different responsibilities, and just like send us home with what the heck do we want people to do with this report if you're adjacent to communities of entrepreneurship?
Okay.
Tall order, Jamie. You're the pro, so I asked you the big questions.
So look, as the world's largest global wealth manager and at the scale that we operate, of course, we're going to look at this through the lens of our firm's purpose. And I think if you're serious about change, it does take a decade to see outcomes like this and a multi-pronged approach, I think, to advance common goals. So we talked a little bit about the key benefits of entrepreneurship with this potential to build generational wealth and create opportunities. I think that my colleagues and I all see that investing in entrepreneurs of all backgrounds, we can create a more dynamic and inclusive economy, and it benefits all of us. It creates opportunities not only for founders and communities, but also investors. And I think that we very much approach this work as a continuum, which is why you spoke with and also see how active parts of the firm are in bringing to bear different kinds of expertise and skills and networks to this work. In social impact, it's very much about planting seeds, using philanthropic capital to invest really in addressing inequities and some of those root causes. I think that there's another end of the continuum around sustainable and impact investing, and that's where our clients can have an impact in the world through, in ways that actually benefit people and planet. I think being conscious of and addressing needs and being responsive to needs in the community in terms of economic development is another area where our CRA work comes in. And then ultimately, driving returns is core to our business. Serving entrepreneurs, partnering with them, meeting their needs. It's really how we link the social investment to our business in wealth management, in the investment bank. So I think that's sort of the continuum along UBS. In terms of the report itself, I just want to say thank you, Chris. And technically, this was a labor of love, I know. And the truth is that We've learned a lot. We continue to learn a lot from our partners like Victor and Kelly. I think that what we wanted to do was take a look back at the landscape itself, but it's not just looking back, but it's like, how can we use this to inform the future? How do we ensure that we sustain our commitments and investments in a real outcomes-driven way? And I think this report includes considerations and a starting point, a tangible checklist to start from, for example, to potentially guide investments in this area from more funders, and just a commitment from UBS to continuing the work across the next decade. So I think that there's things that can be used and learned how to define investment priorities and allocate resources effectively, how to measure impact, leveraging internal and external partnerships to enhance reach. How do you design tailored programs to cater to the needs of entrepreneurs, addressing gaps in capital, connections, services, and how are we going to establish goals to really ensure that the investments that we're making are lasting and sustainable. And I think that of all the ways that we hope that this report will be leveraged, I would just say that, focusing on how we not only help entrepreneurs start companies, but really position them for long-term success is probably the job of all of us in the future, to focus on growth and sustainability. I think that's really important if we are going to actually achieve the benefits that we all believe entrepreneurship can bring.
Jamie, well said. I ran us long. That's a great way to go out. Kelly, Victor, Jamie, thank you so much. You'll see the report below this video, and in follow-ups, the inclusion edge, where inclusive entrepreneurship came, the past, present, and future. Thank you guys all for being part of the conversation.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you all. And please, comments, feedback. We want to know where inclusive entrepreneurship goes next. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.